The National Electrical Code, or NEC, mandates that the handle of a disconnect switch must be readily accessible and operable from a clear space. This clear space requirement is crucial for ensuring worker safety and efficient operation during maintenance or emergency situations. The code specifies minimum dimensions for this clear space to allow personnel to safely and effectively operate the disconnect. Specifically, the NEC requires a clear space that is at least 30 inches wide and 36 inches deep in front of the equipment. This means there should be an unobstructed area extending outwards from the disconnect switch, allowing personnel to stand comfortably and have sufficient room to maneuver. The width of 30 inches ensures that an individual can stand directly in front of the disconnect without being obstructed by adjacent equipment or structures. The depth of 36 inches provides enough space to reach and operate the disconnect handle without having to stretch or lean excessively. When considering the legality of installing equipment under an existing disconnect, several factors must be evaluated in relation to these clear space requirements. If the installation necessitates leaning over the equipment to access and operate the disconnect, it typically violates the NEC clear space provisions. The requirement for readily accessible and operable disconnects aims to prevent situations where personnel might be encumbered or put at risk while trying to de-energize electrical circuits. This includes avoiding configurations where reaching the disconnect handle requires awkward movements or postures that could impede swift and safe operation. It is essential to consider the physical dimensions of the equipment being installed and how it affects the accessibility of the disconnect. If the equipment obstructs the clear space even partially, it may not meet NEC standards. For instance, if the new equipment is 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, placing it directly beneath a disconnect located 6 feet high could create an obstruction that requires leaning over the equipment to reach the disconnect handle. This situation does not comply with the NEC requirement for a clear, unobstructed space. The NEC requirements extend beyond just the physical dimensions of the clear space. The clear space must also be maintained free of obstructions that could impede access to the disconnect. This includes items such as stored materials, temporary equipment, or structural elements that could hinder movement or operation. Ensuring that the clear space remains unobstructed is a continuous responsibility that must be maintained throughout the lifespan of the installation. Regular inspections should be conducted to verify that the clear space is free of any impediments. It is also important to consider the working clearances around electrical equipment, which are closely related to the clear space requirements for disconnects. Working clearances are specified in the NEC to provide sufficient space for personnel to safely perform tasks such as inspection, maintenance, and repair. These clearances vary depending on the voltage level of the equipment and the presence of exposed live parts. The NEC provides detailed tables and guidelines for determining the appropriate working clearances for different types of electrical equipment. When planning the installation of new equipment near existing electrical disconnects, it is essential to consult these tables and ensure that the working clearances are maintained. In addition to the clear space and working clearance requirements, the NEC also addresses the mounting height of disconnect switches. The code specifies that the center of the operating handle of a disconnect switch should be no more than 6 feet 7 inches above the floor or working platform. This height limitation is intended to ensure that the disconnect is readily accessible to personnel of average height. If the disconnect handle is mounted too high, it could be difficult or impossible for some individuals to reach and operate it safely. Therefore, it is crucial to verify that the disconnect is mounted at an appropriate height that complies with the NEC requirements. In summary, the NEC places a strong emphasis on ensuring that disconnect switches are readily accessible and operable from a clear space. This requirement is intended to protect personnel from electrical hazards and facilitate safe and efficient operation of electrical systems. When installing new equipment near existing disconnects, it is essential to carefully evaluate the clear space, working clearances, and mounting height to ensure compliance with the NEC. Failure to comply with these requirements can result in code violations, increased risk of electrical accidents, and potential liability. Always consult the latest edition of the NEC and consult with qualified electrical professionals to ensure that all electrical installations meet the applicable safety standards. Understanding and adhering to these regulations is crucial for maintaining a safe and code-compliant electrical system. The clear space requirements are not just about physical dimensions, but also about ensuring unobstructed access. This means that the space in front of the disconnect should be free from any obstacles that could hinder a person's ability to reach and operate the switch. For instance, stored materials, temporary equipment, or structural elements cannot encroach upon the required clear space. Maintaining this unobstructed access is an ongoing responsibility and requires regular inspections to ensure compliance. Consider a scenario where a disconnect switch is located in a mechanical room. If maintenance personnel store equipment or materials in front of the disconnect, it violates the clear space requirements. This could impede quick access to the disconnect in case of an emergency, potentially leading to delays in shutting off power and increasing the risk of electrical hazards. The working clearances specified in NEC provide enough space for personnel to safely perform tasks such as inspection, maintenance, and repair. These clearances are dependent on the voltage level of the equipment and whether there are exposed live parts. The NEC provides tables and guidelines for determining the appropriate working clearances for different types of electrical equipment. When installing new equipment near existing electrical disconnects, these tables must be consulted to ensure that the working clearances are maintained. For example, NEC Table 110.26 specifies the minimum working clearances for electrical equipment operating at different voltage levels. These clearances are measured from the front of the equipment to any grounded surfaces or other electrical equipment. The specific clearance requirements vary depending on the voltage and the presence of exposed live parts. The height at which a disconnect switch is mounted also plays a crucial role in its accessibility. The NEC specifies that the center of the operating handle of a disconnect switch should be no more than 6 feet 7 inches above the floor or working platform. This height limitation is intended to ensure that the disconnect is readily accessible to personnel of average height. If a disconnect handle is mounted too high, it may be difficult or impossible for some individuals to reach and operate it safely. Therefore, it is essential to verify that the disconnect is mounted at an appropriate height that complies with the NEC. In addition to these specific requirements, the NEC also includes general provisions for electrical safety that apply to all electrical installations. These provisions address issues such as grounding, overcurrent protection, and wiring methods. It is important to be familiar with these general requirements as well as the specific requirements for disconnect switches to ensure a safe and code-compliant electrical system. To summarize, the NEC places a strong emphasis on ensuring that disconnect switches are readily accessible and operable from a clear space. This requirement is intended to protect personnel from electrical hazards and facilitate the safe and efficient operation of electrical systems. When installing new equipment near existing disconnects, it is essential to carefully evaluate the clear space, working clearances, and mounting height to ensure compliance with the NEC. Consulting with qualified electrical professionals and staying updated in the latest edition of the NEC are critical steps in maintaining a safe and code-compliant electrical system. For instance, consider a situation where a new piece of equipment is planned to be installed under an existing disconnect switch. The disconnect is located about 6 feet up and the new equipment is 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. The equipment would be positioned directly under the disconnect, potentially requiring personnel to lean over the equipment to operate the disconnect. In this scenario, the primary concern is whether the installation complies with the NEC clear space requirement. As previously discussed, the NEC mandates a clear space of at least 30 inches wide and 36 inches deep in front of electrical equipment, including disconnect switches. This clear space must be free from any obstructions that could hinder access to the equipment. In the given scenario, the new equipment would obstruct the clear space in front of the disconnect switch. Although the disconnect itself would be accessible, operating it would require leaning over the 4-foot tall equipment. This does not meet the NEC requirement for a clear, unobstructed space, as personnel would not be able to stand comfortably and operate the disconnect without physical impediment. Therefore, installing the equipment in this manner would likely violate the NEC. To comply with the NEC, alternative solutions would need to be considered. One option would be to relocate the disconnect switch to a location where it has the required clear space. Another option would be to modify the layout of the equipment to ensure that the clear space in front of the disconnect is unobstructed. It is important to note that the specific requirements of the NEC may vary depending on the local jurisdiction. Therefore, it is always advisable to consult with local electrical inspectors or qualified electrical professionals to ensure compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. They can provide guidance on specific installation requirements and help identify any potential issues before the installation is completed. In addition to the clear space requirements, it is also important to consider the working clearances around the disconnect switch. As previously mentioned, the NEC specifies minimum working clearances for electrical equipment operating at different voltage levels. These clearances are intended to provide enough space for personnel to safely perform tasks such as inspection, maintenance, and repair. When installing new equipment near an existing disconnect switch, it is essential to ensure that the working clearances are maintained. This may require relocating the equipment or the disconnect switch to provide adequate space for personnel to work safely. It is also important to consider the environmental conditions in the area where the disconnect switch is located. The NEC requires that electrical equipment be suitable for the environment in which it is installed. For example, if the disconnect switch is located in a damp or wet location, it must be rated for wet locations. Similarly, if the disconnect switch is located in a hazardous location, it must be rated for that type of hazardous location. Ensuring that the disconnect switch is suitable for the environment is crucial for preventing electrical hazards and ensuring the long-term reliability of the equipment. In conclusion, when installing new equipment near an existing disconnect switch, it is essential to carefully consider the NEC clear space requirements, working clearances, and environmental conditions. Compliance with these requirements is crucial for ensuring a safe and code-compliant electrical installation. Always consult with qualified electrical professionals and local electrical inspectors to ensure that all applicable codes and regulations are met. Remember that electrical safety is paramount, and adhering to the NEC is essential for protecting personnel from electrical hazards. The NEC is not just a set of rules, but a comprehensive guide to ensuring the safe and reliable operation of electrical systems. By understanding and following the NEC, we can create a safer environment for ourselves and others. Let's examine some additional scenarios to further clarify the application of the NEC clear space requirements for disconnect switches. Imagine a situation where a disconnect switch is located in a narrow corridor. The corridor is wide enough to meet the 30-inch width requirement, but the depth in front of the disconnect is less than 36 inches due to a wall or other obstruction. In this case, the installation would not comply with the NEC clear space requirements, as the full 36-inch depth is necessary to provide adequate space for personnel to operate the disconnect safely. Another scenario involves a disconnect switch located in a crowded electrical room. The room contains various pieces of equipment, and the space in front of the disconnect is partially obstructed by cables, conduits, and other electrical components. Even if the overall dimensions of the clear space meet the NEC requirements, the presence of these obstructions could hinder access to the disconnect and create a safety hazard. In this case, the electrical room would need to be reorganized to ensure that the clear space in front of the disconnect is free from any obstructions. Consider a disconnect switch located in a manufacturing facility. The facility uses forklifts to move materials around, and the forklift operators occasionally block the clear space in front of the disconnect while maneuvering their vehicles. This situation presents a potential safety hazard, as the disconnect may not be readily accessible in case of an emergency. The facility would need to implement procedures to ensure that the clear space in front of the disconnect is kept clear of forklifts and other equipment at all times. Let's also consider a disconnect switch located outdoors. The switch is mounted on a pole, and the ground in front of the pole is uneven and sloped. This makes it difficult for personnel to stand comfortably and operate the disconnect. In this case, the ground in front of the pole would need to be leveled to provide a stable and even surface for personnel to stand on. These examples illustrate the importance of considering all aspects of the clear space requirements when installing and maintaining disconnect switches. It is not enough to simply meet the dimensional requirements. The clear space must also be free from obstructions, accessible, and safe for personnel to use. Always consult with qualified electrical professionals and local electrical inspectors to ensure that all applicable codes and regulations are met. Remember that electrical safety is a shared responsibility, and by working together, we can create a safer environment for everyone. Now let's delve into some specific details and potential challenges related to interpreting and applying the NEC clear space requirements. One common challenge is determining what constitutes an obstruction. The NEC does not provide a definitive list of what is considered an obstruction, so it is up to the electrical inspector to make a judgment based on the specific circumstances. However, as a general rule, any object that hinders access to the disconnect or makes it more difficult to operate is considered an obstruction. This could include anything from large equipment to small tools and supplies. Another challenge is interpreting the term readily accessible. The NEC defines readily accessible as capable of being reached quickly for operation, renewal, or inspections without requiring those to whom ready access is requisite to climb over or remove obstacles or to resort to portable ladders, and so forth. This means that the disconnect must be easily accessible without the need for special tools or equipment. If the disconnect is located behind a locked door or requires the use of a ladder to reach, it is not considered readily accessible. A further challenge is ensuring that the clear space requirements are maintained over time. Even if the installation initially complies with the NEC, the clear space can become obstructed due to changes in the layout of the facility or the storage of materials in front of the disconnect. It is important to conduct regular inspections to ensure that the clear space is maintained and that any obstructions are removed promptly. In some cases, it may be necessary to install barriers or other protective measures to prevent the clear space from being obstructed. For example, if the disconnect is located in an area where forklifts operate, it may be necessary to install bollards or guardrails to protect the disconnect from being struck by a forklift. Similarly, if the disconnect is located in an area where materials are stored, it may be necessary to install shelving or other storage solutions to prevent materials from being stored in front of the disconnect. In addition to these practical challenges, there are also some legal and regulatory considerations to keep in mind. Failure to comply with the NEC can result in fines, penalties, and even criminal charges. In some cases, the electrical inspector may require the facility to shut down until the violations are corrected. It is important to take the NEC seriously and to ensure that all electrical installations are compliant with the applicable codes and regulations. If you are unsure about any aspect of the NEC, it is always best to consult with a qualified electrical professional. They can provide guidance on specific installation requirements and help you avoid costly mistakes. By understanding and following the NEC, you can help to ensure a safe and reliable electrical system for yourself and others. Remember that electrical safety is a continuous process and it requires ongoing vigilance and attention to detail.